My name is Luka. I'm from Croatia. I've been a Python developer for the last 10 years or something like that. And I would like to give you my view of how to set up and actually use the project that you will be working on so that in 2, 3, 5 years' time, you can actually maintain it, extend it, and make money from it. So, we will cover just few topics since this is a complex story. You have to, actually before you even start anything, you need to think about your code. What will the project be doing? So you have a requirement to build something. You can have good specifications, which is not so often the case, and you can have something that's build me another Facebook. So if you have that opposite specters of project development, how can you even start working if you don't know which library or framework to choose from? Because if the specification is not set in stone, how do you know what will happen? How do you know what will, have to be developed, maintained, and thought about during your development process? So that's the hard question. We actually had requirements that was, build another Facebook. That was the specification. We need to maintain Facebook clone with Instagram features and Twitter and WhatsApp features combined. And that was the length of the description, yeah. So, how did we choose the framework? How did we actually decide what to use? Well, we said, since the specification is not set in stone, we have no idea what will happen, so we will choose what we know best. Because if we are good in something, we were good in Pyramid and Flask, so we chose those frameworks. Some of you might be well versed in Django or some other framework or another programming language, yeah, not Python per se. So use what you know, what you can customize because you have experience with it. Don't experiment on such complicated projects because that will lead to, deadlines missed, paychecks not paid, and general dissatisfaction on every end of the, food chain, from the guy who ordered the code to you, who are not sleeping at nights because you missed one deadline. So if the specification is set and you know what will be required from you, you can then choose the right framework, right library, because you actually can compare the documentation of that library with the specification, choose the right one, and actually read on the internet if it's still alive or not, like we did when we had to implement chat and we used Flask with sockets, because we started with Pyramid and there was a library for sockets in Pyramid. Yeah, just plug it in and it works. We started coding, then the specification of the WebSockets changed from 1 to 2, and the guy who wrote the library said, yeah, I couldn't be bothered. So we had a choice. We could fork the library and, maintain another 10,000 lines of code, or use something else. So we switched that part, we rewrote it in Flask. Why did we do it? Because we couldn't keep up with the changes. The requirements were changing, and we had to use the tools that were most available at that point in time. So that was like 6 years ago. So the whole project pivoted like 27 times and is now dead. Yeah, because the owner, couldn't get customers, but yeah, not my problem. Sorry, but that's so how can you keep up with the changes? You need to constantly read. You need to investigate. We actually had to update like 75 libraries at once because of some security issues on the underlying servers. So that was, sleepless nights. Libraries that actually could provide us with 2 lines of code: import this, get, use. Had dependencies that were pain in the ass, like static C libraries that were hard to get somewhere on internet. You had to actually download the C file, compile it, and put it somewhere where the Python could find it, wrap around it, call it, and use it. And then later on, we actually discarded that whole part of the video processing project because Amazon has it all. And you just, import d.o.o and send file to S3, run some custom job, and the video gets transcoded. But we could do it because we actually had very well. Oh, this one is. Okay. We had separate projects for each. They were not called microservices back then, they were called modules. And we said, let's modularize the project. Let's, extend and reuse the software we know and we can develop. And actually, we had to learn a lot because we had to, at one point, use default settings for MongoDB. You know what that means? We had a MongoDB database that was open to the world. So after that, we actually had to read the docs. Don't use default settings, like we had YAML files. PyYAML has the default method is read YAML that can actually execute code if you get YAML file from somebody, who does like to, create malware. So read the docs, don't use default settings, at least read them, and then extend on it. And how did we extend? Like I said, before microservices were, we actually used modules because the code kept changing, so we had to store those pieces of code somewhere where it's easily plugged in, and you don't have to change everything just for switching a video provider. Actually, we switched the whole storage from local servers to AWS, then to S3 buckets, then on cloud, DNS, and everything kept working because we had separate module for storing files. We actually, it's not so easily readable, sorry about that. We use this extensively. We actually create a contract and we say everything will be implemented in the same way. And then you can just switch the implementation details in the module because you respect the contract that you yourself decided upon. We actually had a meeting, we discussed, and we said the best practices are use simple interfaces, hide the implementation details deep down in the modules, don't import in the main code base anything from the module except the interface implementation. So we don't care where the file is stored. When somebody uploads a file, we push the file somewhere, it gets validated, it gets stored, it gets transcoded, it gets resized to, images get resized to like 12 different thumbnails and stuff, but we don't care about it. And we don't care where it's stored because you have modules taking care of that. And you can switch those modules if you respect the contract. So we based all our hard work and future of the project on simple aspect of actually reading, learning, and implementing separate things in separate modules by what we thought were, at the time, using the best practices of the language and the framework we chose. So that actually helped us pivot those 27 times and reuse some of the actual modules, because since they did not depend on anything from the larger code base, you can just plug that module out and use it in another project. Import file server, and it works. We went to a bunch of conferences, meetups in Croatia and local. We went to Bratislava last year, to Belgrade. We will go to Czechia this summer. We came here because this is not something that's simple. It's something that you actually have to discuss with other people who had similar problems. It's not just, oh, let's build a module, let's build a framework, let's build a library. Yeah, but how? Somebody might actually help you with that. So you go, you say, okay, I have a problem. My problem is underlying bottle library for AWS doesn't work on Python 3. He says, yeah, you have the new library. It's not actually so well documented and implemented, but you can use it. And you can extend it. That was like 3 years ago. And yeah, it got better, but you had to ask. It was very deep. So visit, share knowledge. If you find some interesting problem and you find a solution, please post answer at least on Stack Overflow, if not write a blog post. So that's something that will actually keep us all, you know, better developers. And you can code for the future. You can actually reuse that code 5 years from now, if you plan ahead. If you just do a couple of simple things, like think, read, and then implement what you thought were best practices. And lastly, these are a couple of good links for starting. If somebody is starting with development in Python, I suggest this especially. The guy has excellent book on Flask that's a general outlaying of Python web framework, you know, the whole project, how to set it up, how to use it. It's very simple, well, so I suggest that one. And then after that, you know, start experimenting. Use smaller frameworks like BottlePy to actually understand what is a request response cycle in a web application. Because Django hides that. You know, you have request, you have response, that's it. You can read the whole BottlePy is one file. Framework is one file, so you can read it in an afternoon. So I suggest you do that. It's very well written. And then you can move up. And maybe, you know, we'll hear you talk. Thank you so much. Any questions? That's it from me.